Okay, so we're jumping into the world of parameters. So I see here missing from the list is a family parameter instead of just family type and family instance. They pretty much work all of the same. So we're probably just going to jump right into family instance parameters. They work the same as family and family type. So let's go look at these parameters and discover what the heck is all this stuff in here. We're going to look at the data model real quick. You'll notice there's a family parameters, there are family type parameters, and family instance parameters in here. And so let's go in our pure table view and we will chop through this data. Okay, so the element, as you probably know by now, is what's going to link our tables together. So here there's, for example, the family type element or the key here that links to the element. And so the element links to the proper keys inside of the element table. Now, the other thing that's important to know is you can troubleshoot using this element table. So let's say I just go in my regular Explorer, and I'm going to duplicate this so I can move things around. I'm going to make a bit of space here. And what I'll do is I'll add the element key as one of the things that I'm actually showing. So below the Revit ID at the fully at the end, I'm going to have the element key. So let's just expand this. And what are we looking at here, right? We're looking at an air diffuser. We're looking at this air diffuser. That's the Revit ID. That is the element key. So let's copy that element key. Now we see here actually, well, these are all the parameters related to this. We're going to focus on the instance parameter here. And these are all of the parameters inside of here. So how do we poke around in our table? We're going to grab that key, the 109,429, and we're going to say only show me things related to this number. Now we see we have 25 rows, and each one of those rows is a parameter for that element. So let's just go here. That's the descriptor name, right? So for this air terminal, the flow is 160 CFM. There is no image. The mark number is 2. The size is 6 inches. The schedule level is level 1. This is our parameters based on that element number. So the element number here is all the same. And if you go in the element table, that's going to be your key basically. So if I look here at this key number, well, guess what? We have our return diffuser with plenum. We kind of have all of that information in here. And so that's how you can kind of troubleshoot and try to figure out what's happening if you're getting a little bit lost. You can probably do it more easily by doing matrices, but just know that it's possible if you're seeing some anomalies, it's possible to navigate the tables using the key that you're trying to interrogate. And so here's our key for that air diffuser. Right now we're looking at all of its parameters. Okay, I'm going to remove the filter. So I'm just going to go here, clear all filters. And now we see the kind of, regular mess that we have. We may want to sort this so that things get grouped together. And it gives us an idea, like these things here, all the zeros, that's the same element. If we go closer to the end on the right side, we'll see there's a column called element category name full. So if you're kind of wondering like what the heck are all these zeros, and let's just filter by zeros just so we can look at it here. Well, when we look at this here, it's a view. That's the name of the category. So already that's kind of useful in understanding what the heck is going on. Why am I getting these types of parameter names and so forth? So that's the element category full name. Let's remove the filter and we'll move down our table. Now notice here there's a folder called parameter descriptor. And here it says descriptor, 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 versus down here it says parameter, 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 parameter. So what the heck is a descriptor and what the heck is a parameter? A descriptor is basically the name of the parameter. So this descriptor is called elevation from level. And it's got a descriptor group called constraints versus what we would call the value of the parameter. That's what you're going to find in your parameter list. So when I poke around down here, the parameter display value, that's what I'm showing here in this values versus up here, I've got, well, the Revit ID, then the descriptor group, and then the descriptor name. So it's very important to understand what's descriptor, what is a parameter. And you can count both. They're very separate, right? So if we look, for example, at the parameter instance report, here we are counting the descriptors. So there's one parameter that's called size, but there's 32,000 values. So that's the parameter key in this case that we're counting. So if I select this, we're going to see we're counting the parameter keys here, and we're also counting the descriptor names actually is what we're counting. But we could have been counting the descriptor keys. And so this is interesting because when we do a count distinct on the descriptor keys, well, we find that it's not the same. We get bigger numbers, right? So what the heck does that mean? Why do we have a lot of different descriptor keys? And the reason for that is because we are using multiple parameters that have the name, or let's just do a sort here and we'll see what kind of our biggest offenders are. All right, so we're seeing a lot of different names. We're seeing a lot of different project address. These are parameters that they're not the same. They have the same name, but they're not the same. For example, this is probably the project address in each of the 4 models. So it's not the same parameter when you look at the descriptor key. And we'll find this very often. All right, so here, for example, we have a good value. The angle, you see the name just once. However, there's 20 different parameters that are called angle, and they're not the same. So in this case, this is a standard parameter. That means that the BIM manager went into 28 different families and added the parameter angle, but it's not a shared parameter. Therefore, there are 28 parameters called angle that do not talk to each other. And sometimes when we see that the parameter is built in, for example, that's Revit making that mistake. So we can't really solve it. But if we want to solve it, like same thing for width, right? They went in a door, they made a parameter called width. They went in a window, they made a parameter called width. They're not the same parameter. They don't talk to each other. They're 14 different parameters called width. So I kind of didn't expose this in the parameter instance report because I didn't want to scare anybody, but it's probably worth its own audit report to show the parameters that are having the same name but that are not actually equalized. And sometimes you'll see some of them are shared, some of them are numbers, some of them are text, some of them are in another model, etc. So it's kind of a beautiful mess. We're not going to dive in right now. I've given you enough to have quite the headache just from my description, I'm sure. So let's move on. But the main concept I want you to remember from this is that the descriptors are the names of the parameters and the parameters are the values when we look at these lists. So with that being said, let's poke into the descriptor one by one into this little folder. So the first thing we'll have is the group. And I showed you already, this is the group, right? So this is exactly how we see things grouped inside of Revit. So you can simply drag it in your hierarchy above your descriptor name, and it's going to sort everything nicely like that. The second thing is the descriptor GUID. That's going to be your share parameter GUID. So if you've got a share parameter, especially if you don't want to mix it with the parameters with the same name, look per descriptor GUID. That's your key to the proper data. Here we have whether the parameter is read only. So it's going to be 0 or a 1. Not super useful, but you know the data is there. Whether the parameter is shared. Now, if it's got a GUID, it's shared, but you have a true or false here, so you can use it to filter things. The descriptor key, so if you want to count how many descriptors, that's where you would look at that, right? So you could say, for example, give me a list of everything by descriptor name and then count the descriptor keys. This is not, you're going to get what we just saw a minute ago, multiple things with the same name, but have multiple keys. Now we have the descriptor name with the Power BI case sensitivity. So this is very important. You can watch the case sensitivity video on that or go back to the element table description where we talk about the differentiation. Parameter type. This is going to tell you the type of data that is in there. So is it a text? Is it a number? Is it a URL? Is it wattage? What kind of information is there? Not everything is going to have a parameter type. As you can see, sometimes it's empty. We try to get, there are some things that are just too internal to Revit that Revit doesn't really quite tell us what the heck it's talking about. So here, these are a bunch of settings, right? Visibility graphics override. There's not a single way of putting that. It's just something that is very peculiar to Revit. Or like a work set. Technically a work set is text, but Revit also points to the actual number of the work set if we go in our work set table. So it's a bit more than just text in that sense. So that's why in that we don't see the actual parameter type data in here. Okay, storage type, I believe this is kind of a secret value that tells us whether it's a built-in standard parameter and so forth. Actually, you probably want to just hide that. It's not very human friendly. Oh, there we go. That's the human friendly version of it. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, you see whether it's built-in global project or standard. So that's the column you actually want to use. Forget about the storage type column. That's just, you know, some noise basically. Okay, we are getting out of the descriptor list. We've gone through all of them. Let's poke into the parameter values themselves. So parameter display value, that's exactly what Revit is going to tell you inside of Revit, right? So it's going to show you the units, and this is always text. So even though it looks like numbers, you cannot sum this up. This is text value. So it's great if you want to see exactly what was in Revit. But if you want to start summing things up, you're going to need to go to the parameter quantities or one of these parameter quantities, which we'll look at in a couple seconds. Now, the display value, we also have it as case sensitive. Once again, quite important if you want to make sure that this is written perfectly. And here we have the parameter keys. So let's say a parameter is applied to 30,000 elements. You know, 30,000 elements have a material or a level value. Well, if you want to get that 30,000 number, you would count the parameter keys. There's one parameter, so that's one parameter descriptor key, but there's 30,000 parameter values. That's where you count the parameter key. Okay, the quantities is where we start summing things up. Important thing to know, everything in Revit comes as feet. So I don't care if it says 500 meters inside of Revit. Internally, it's looking at that data as feet. So when we say quantity, it implies that it is in feet. Now, we've done the annoying work of converting all of that to metric in both meters and millimeters. So obviously, it's going to be a different conversion when we're looking at length versus areas versus volume. Let's poke into the transform data real quick, and we'll have a look at this transformation. So here we've got the family instance parameter. And in here, we have the added metric millimeters to columns. So let's look at this beautiful formula. First off, it converts the angles because the original angles are given in radians. Nobody wants a radian angle. We all want, 90 degrees, 10 degrees, and so forth. So we convert the angles. Don't look at the quantities for the angles because you're going to get very confused. You want the metric or the millimeter angles that are actually proper. Then we do a different conversion for length. We do a different conversion for area, and we do a different conversion for volume. So it goes without saying, if you are using metric, meters, or millimeters, these are the columns you're going to want to have for your summing of angles, of length, of areas, of volumes, etc. Now, these three columns are kind of special. They're kind of a combination of the display values and the converted values. You're only going to use these three tables in a single setting, which is when you promote parameters. So go look at customizing your report playlist, where we talk about customizing parameters and where we talk about promoting parameters. So if you promote to feet, if you promote to meters, or if you promote to millimeters, these are the three columns you're going to use. Finally, here we have the parameter value. Generally, this has already been integrated into the parameter quantities. You'll notice, for example, sometimes when it talks about hey, here's a parameter. The parameter is a work set. Well, if you go in the values, you're not going to see the name of that work set. You're going to see the element ID of that work set. And then finally, we have a parameter summary. I don't think this is necessarily accurate. I think this may need a little bit of love, but the purpose of this is to help you determine which parameters are filled, which parameters are partially filled, which parameters are filled 100%, but they only have one value. So keep an eye on that. I don't think it's 100% working right now. I think this is a work in progress, so you can ignore it for the time being. Now, the same concepts are going to apply in the family type parameters and the family instance parameters and the family parameters. So just keep that in mind. And so actually, this is a very chunky piece of data, right? Parameters are complicated. They're probably the biggest table inside of Revit. So I'm glad we went through this, and we'll move on to the next table. All right, talk to you soon. Cheers.